How to lash a net. If possible, the easiest thing to do is like I've done here, which is weave the cable through it, and that's quite a simple process by taking the cable and going under one mesh, over the top of the next mesh, under one mesh, and over the top. Now technically, from a structural point of view, you have your ultimate connection here, in that this border would need to fail. So this border is always going to be a preferred attachment method over lashing, meaning you really don't need to lash this as far as technically installing a safety net. On the other side of the net, I've shown it where we've woven it through where there's an additional mesh. We manufacture a shrinking net to be larger. So if for some reason it's a little bit larger and you feel you want to pull a little bit of mesh out of it, you can do that by weaving the net or attaching the net in a mesh. When you lash that mesh, you're going to just grab it, and I'll show that a little bit later on. I'm going to show this starting mid-span, but of course you would start at the end of the net. The first thing you do is secure your rope. It's not very complicated. You just simply tie a knot. Usually I try to cover my knot. So what I would do for a hitch, all a hitch is you come over the net, over the rope, come through it, and then pull that up. Come to the next mesh, come over the rope, throw it up. Now this is a half hitch. So really what I'm doing is I'm bringing this loop up, I'm throwing the loop over the top of the net, I'm coming up underneath through the mesh and through that loop itself. And that's how you do a half hitch. Now you don't want to do half hitches all the way down, although you can do a series of them. Every so often you want to do a full hitch, which would be once again throwing the loop over the top, throwing up underneath the top of it, pulling it out. And then actually really what you're doing is you're hitching over the top of your last mesh. So you have, instead of one, you have two, and that locks it in place. If you want, you can do full hitches at every location, but once again, I'm showing the method of hitching as if I did not weave the cable through it, meaning I'm going to pull the net over to the cable, I'm going to take the border rope, and I'm going to hitch it to the cable, in which case the lashing does become my attachment method. The ASTM standards require that the lashing that you use for attaching the mesh needs to have the same strength or the same breaking strength as the mesh itself. So you see me using the actual same rope that is in the net. Also for a point, this is easier to remove if you need to replace the net than it is with the small lashing that you're doing a lot of it on a repetitive basis. I'm going to switch over and talk about the other side for a minute. How much rope to use when lashing. As a general rule, when you spread your arms out point to point is the same as your height. So if you're 6 foot tall, to the end of your fingers on both sides is going to be about 6 feet. So I always figure that I'm going to get about 5 feet of rope if I take the rope, pull it through my hand, come back over, grab it again, and pull it through my hand. At that, I normally will do 5 of those, so I have about 25 feet of rope. That way you have enough that you're not doing a lot of splices into the net, and you also have a reasonable amount that you're pulling through the net, because bear in mind, as I'm showing you this hitching, I'm pulling through it. So in this case, where we've actually woven an additional mesh through, we're going to start it in the same method. We're going to come in here, and we're going to just tie a simple knot. Now you can leave this tail long if you want. Bear in mind, I'm using shrinking rope here, and when the shrinking rope is tightened, it's actually going to bind this knot very securely. So I'm showing you using the highest technology materials possible. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to throw my loop over the top. I'm going to come up through it, and I'm going to do a simple half hitch. As I do that, I'm gathering up this mesh. So I'm doing the same thing again, half hitch over through the top. Now I can do this either way, meaning I'm working from the outside of the net. So as I'm working from the outside of the net, you're going to see this on the outer face. If for some reason I want to work from inside the net, let's say I'm attaching a barrier net, my rope will be on the inside side of the net. It's more of a matter of preference than anything else. So I'm going to do one full hitch again here, pull it through, pull my hitch down, come back over the top, through itself, and you'll notice that my second part of my full hitch always lands below my half hitch. So I'm actually coming over the top of it, so I'm locking my first half hitch in place with my completing the full hitch. I'm going to talk about splicing the rope out when you get to the end of it next. Okay, now I've cheated a bit with the rope just to give a visual idea of if you've hitched up to this point and now you're at the end of your rope. but you still have more net to attach. I'm going to always do a full hitch before I do a splice. A rope splice is pretty easy. It's simply a square knot. A square knot is simply by going over and under, and a square knot should look like this, where actually you can take it and you can push it end to end. It's a great knot, nice and compact. You can always come back and trim these, or you can put them in your hitch. Normally they get covered over by the hitch. So what I'm going to do now is I've spliced this rope. I need to continue on going. So I'm going to do another half hitch here. And I'm simply going to pull this hitch all the way through as if that knot isn't there. Now you can see I've actually, by the way I've done this, I've sort of grabbed my knot in it. I'm going to come here and I'm going to do another full hitch because I'm at the end of my splice. So I'm going to come here, full hitch over the top of it. That's just simply a snag that you sometimes will get. In any case, I'm pulling that through, and now I'm going to come up and I'm going to start with my half hitches. I guess a safe rule of thumb would be 3 half hitches to every full hitch, but once again, it's sort of a matter of preference. Some people prefer to do full hitches at every section. Again, I can't overstress. If I've woven through the cable, I'm wasting my time by doing this lashing. It's really serving no purpose because the failure of the mesh is going to be here at the bar of the mesh. It's not going to be at the lashing. This is made possible, really, weaving this rope through by the virtue of the fact that we're using shrinking net and it's oversized. Bear in mind, in a traditional net, you need to be pulling all of this sag out during the installation process. So if you're doing a non-shrinking net, you really need to make sure that your border and your finished net is the width between the two cables. So if you're doing that and you've already hitched one side of it, you're going to be pulling the full body of weight of the net against the other cable, and you're going to have to pull it over. You're going to have to hold it in place, assuming this is the edge of the net, and then you're going to have to do your hitching. So you're going to constantly be pulling this over, and if you're up in the air and you're standing on a lift or standing in an elevated surface, there's no way to be able to pull this net tight. You certainly cannot work from within the net because you couldn't pull your weight over. Once this net shrinks, the amazing thing is it goes perfectly tight. So everything is sized to fit and make installation very easy. I'm going to just talk in general about doing mesh. I have it just hanging up here. But the easiest way to do mesh, once again to eliminate lashing, it's maybe a little bit difficult to see, is I've actually just folded this mesh in half. Meaning I've taken the bottom side of the mesh, I'll use right here, and I've simply folded that in half so that I'm actually going over and under through that, meaning my cut end or my tail end of the net is on the inside and my clean end is on the outside. Then I'm going to weave the rope. In this case we did shrinking rope. You could weave a cable in and out, in and out. Once again, you have the ultimate strength of the mesh. You have a nice clean finish, and actually it's a matter of preference. If you want to lash it, normally I would recommend that you leave the tails cut. This happens to be a factory cut where we have a proprietary method for cutting it this way. Leave the tail out. Some people don't like that. They like to lash it in. It's a matter of preference. You can use a finer lashing for the border. With that said, this happens to be an example on one of our test frames where we're bringing the mesh down and we're actually using the same mesh to close the bottom section below the net so kids can't get through it. The easiest way to do this is to pull this down so that you have the tension that you want to see on your net. Once again, I haven't tensioned the top cable, so I'm not going to get straight lines, but normally I'd be looking for straight parallel lines in my mesh. I'm going to pull this down tight. I'm just going to simply take a tie wrap through here, and I'm going to just simply use it as a little holding device to sort of position my mesh where I want it. It just makes it a little easier than trying to find your eye. But if you think of mesh, especially square mesh, as using graph paper, I'm going to follow my mesh up here. I'm always going to try to pull it down. If I have a straight line at my top, I should have a straight line at my bottom, and I'm going to position it. The first things I would normally want to position are my two corners. That way I know I have my width of my net set, and now I'm always simply setting the bottom edge, and it's easier to sort of follow down than you're always pulling this mesh down. Now remember, I said you don't need to lash this, so really at this point I would simply do some simple lashing along the bottom. If I could weave it through, I would have weaved it through, but let's say I'm going to lash it. I'm going to show both methods. In this case, now I need to attach this mesh over to the side so that we have a barrier that's going to keep the kids from going through. If I pulled my mesh, and I could technically do my side mesh and then come and leave it hang and do my bottom mesh secondary. When you're doing your side mesh, you're doing sort of a stair-step process. You think of mesh as normally coming over straight across, through one mesh and through the other mesh. That's the easy way to do it. When you're going up an incline and you're going at an angle, what you're going to do is at every certain point you're going to go up a mesh. So you're going up and over a mesh. You can do it by going directly above it, or you can do it by going to the side of it. To the side of it's probably the easier way. And then once you're up a mesh, you can go up several meshes. Here I went up 2. Or I could just go over one, go over another one. It depends on the angle of incline. And then I come again up a mesh, through the mesh, and then over the mesh. So now I'm getting a nice clean angle, but my vertical lines and my horizontal lines are staying looking very nice. So if I'm going to lash this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the end of my net. Now, normal thinking in old-fashioned net installation and lashing is that you need to take every one of these, in this case 2-inch squares, and you need to hold them down. Well, really what you're trying to accomplish with this is easier again using the shrinking rope product. The reason it's easier is because I can pull tension on this rope. Not only can I pull what I can do manually by hand, but once I wet it, I'm going to be pulling that. So basically what I want to do is I want to run this rope parallel to the barrier net. So I'm coming over, I'm stepping up, I'm going to come over, I'm going to step up. So I'm using this fashion of over and up. I'm going to continue this all the way up the net until I have the 2 ends tensioned. Now I'm going to go and tension the ends, and I'll come back and show you what you do after that. Now what we've done is we've positioned this rope, so like I said, it's coming up parallel to the mesh. You can see that I've used that skip method of coming over and up and over and up. You'll find that as you get into an incline, you're going to learn that you come over 2 meshes, up 1 mesh, over 2 meshes, up 1 mesh. So it becomes a little bit easier as you do more. Of course, in a normal net, you'd be starting at the very end of your barrier. I'm starting mid-barrier here. So, assuming that I've already tied it off, and I've started at my bottom mesh, now really my only purpose is I have a member that's running parallel to the mesh, and then I'm tensioning it. So I'm going to ask Randy to come over here and try to pick that rope up to sort of demonstrate really what I'm talking about. The barrier mesh is going to want to pick this mesh up in between, meaning it's going to want to separate it. As you can see, it doesn't want to separate. So that is holding the mesh in tight in between. A normal traditional rope wants to stretch, meaning that if you put it in tight, over time it's going to want to stretch. This would not necessarily work with a regular rope because you could allow for more deflection to come up in an entrapment issue. But in the case of shrinking rope, we don't need to attach every mesh. We don't want to attach every mesh. If I need to repair the barrier net, I don't want to have to release the climb net. In this case, I don't have to release the climb net. They're independent of one another. I also don't want to have to cut a bunch of little small lashing to replace the barrier. So what I do is I come up, I do a traditional hitch through the barrier, half hitch through the barrier, just like I did earlier in installing it. But now what I'm doing, instead of hitting every 2-inch mesh, like the old-fashioned methods would use, I don't even need to hit every square mesh, which is now on a 3.5-inch mesh grid. I'm going to come up and I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3. I'm going to come up to the 4th mesh, and that is where I'm going to throw my next hitch. So I'm going to come through the mesh. If this was a regular mesh and I was just ending at the bottom of the barrier, I would have probably cut this 1 mesh longer than it needed to be, and I would have grabbed it just like I grabbed the climb net. So I'm making it a little bit more difficult, but I'd rather show you the little bit more difficult way than the simplest way right out of the box. So I come up here and I've done another hitch. Now, as we showed you earlier, this mesh now can't separate. This mesh, as soon as I tighten this is going to shrink, so all of this is going to come very tight. I'm showing this in multiple colors just so visually you can see what's happening. Of course, if it was all the same color as the net, everything starts to blend in. Once again, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, come through my 4th mesh. I'm going to come through here with the lashing, and I'm going to catch that. Once again, like I said, on starting the regular mesh, you can follow a sequence of every so many half lashes. I'm going to come up and do one more even though I didn't weave through the net. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to show you an example of how I might come through it and do a full hitch. So I come through here, I'm going to come back through here again, and I'm going to do a full hitch over the top of it. Now once again, I'm working from the outside of the net, which means all of these are on the outside of the net. If I was working from inside of the net, these outer lengths of rope would be on the inside of the net. Once again, shrinking rope, it's really good. They tension, they hold tight. With a loose rope, you'd want to watch entrapment issues. And that's how easy it is to actually do the actual lashing of a shrinking net. I'm going to show you how to attach to a side barrier real quickly in a minute. Okay, the easiest way to do lashing is with the shuttle. You can do it with the individual lengths of rope like I showed you earlier, but since you're using a smaller lashing size cord, this happens to be non-shrinking, but we do also produce it in shrinking, which is my preferential material. You take it and you would just start it. You can do it by tying a knot, or you can do it by just simply folding over the edge of it. And what you're going to do is you're going to come up the back side of the shuttle, over and go over the middle section, come around the other side, and come around to the opposing side of it. And you're going to keep doing that in a back and forth or a twisting motion. You take the shuttle, you twist it, come up the other side, down, and so on and so forth. And that's how you would load a shuttle. So it's going to predetermine how much material you can get to use with it, but I'm going to go back to now one I've already preloaded. On the barrier mesh, the easiest way to do it is the same way as I just showed on the bottom. Once again, I could come over here and I could do my old style lashing and come over every single mesh, and I guarantee you this, if your hands aren't bleeding when you start, your hands will be bleeding when you're done. So you want to cut the lashing down to a minimum. There's another nice feature about our lashing is we make it out of a super soft rope, which helps save your hands. In the case of lashing, you've got a couple choices on how you can do it. There's nothing wrong with coming out on the end mesh and weaving the shrinking rope through it in the in and out fashion, and you can pull that over to the side. Again, my preferential way to do it, the way I prefer, is to double the mesh over, then I come up through every other mesh. I'm simply cutting one extra mesh. I think it gives me a little cleaner line. It certainly doesn't give me an area where I have any failure, because any failure point would be on the outward bound side of it. And I'm going to come up from top to bottom. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the climb net, meaning I'm going to tension this rope at the top, I'm going to tension this at the bottom. Let me get a tension, I'll go to the next step. Okay, once again, like any other net, I'm starting in the middle of the net, where normally you'd start at the end and you'd work your way down. Your first thing at the very end of the net is going to be simply tying this off. Usually in a lashing, you leave an extra long tail and you would lash over the top of the tail. So to start this, I'm going to do my first hitch below where I tied it. I'm working in a close area, but you can see how the shuttle works. Now I can feed the rope through it, and I can come back through and around the net for my hitch. Come through it, come back. Once again, I'm still doing the same half hitch method. I'm basically creating a loop, coming through the mesh in the loop, and I'm pulling this over tight. So there I've got a full hitch. Now, once again, I'm using shrinking rope. So I'm going to come down here. In this case, just for ease of showing it, I'm going to skip 2 meshes and I'm going to come down to my 3rd mesh. I'm going to come through it. Once again, I'm throwing my half hitch by just letting my rope hang down. I'm doing a half hitch here, 1, 2. I'm going to come back through it. I'm going to go down to my 3rd mesh, and I'm going to come through it again. So you can see I'm getting a nice clean line. I would normally choose my color of my rope to match that, and I'm coming all the way down. I'm going to skip again, 1, 2, come down to number 3. I'm going to come through number 3. And at this case again, I always want to be locking it so that if for some reason I had a failure in here, I'm not going to lose the whole thing. In this example of using shrinking rope, if I had a failure on these 2 hitches, by having a double hitch here, it really wouldn't affect the integrity of the net. It's something I'd want to repair, but not something that could cause injury to a child or a patron. coming over here, over the top of it, a full hitch, and then I'm going to continue my half hitches along. That's how you do easy hitching. I'm just trying to show another method. The way you can do it is, instead of welding that rod, is by welding eyes. These are simple pad eyes that are welded onto the structure. They're welded approximately about every foot apart in this example. You can do the fold over method, or you can do the single method. For this purpose, I'm going to show the single method, where I'm going through just one square. Once again, I can go over, under, using the shrinking rope, over, under. Now, I've pre-tensioned this so I know where my mesh falls based on the tension I need, and it's just lining up because I pulled tension on this border. It's going to line up with my pads. So I come through here, over, under, over, under, over, under. Again, I'm lining up with my pad. In this case, I'm going to come over the loop through, and I'm going to come all the way up to the top. When I get up to the top, I'm going to tension it, and I'm going to tension it at the bottom. So really what I end up with is I end up with the rope serving as my cable or serving as my rod, and I need nothing else. I'm using the ultimate attachment point on the mesh, which is the mesh itself. I mean, you're putting a border on the mesh to support every bar, and I'm effectively supporting every bar. Just one more thing while I'm talking about this. We have a new patented system that will be coming out in about a month. We'll be eliminating all of these methods, so stay tuned.